Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, and we begin today with the major breakthrough in the war in the Middle East. President Trump announcing Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a peace deal that would stop the fighting in the Gaza Strip and release all remaining hostages, living and deceased, potentially as soon as Monday or Tuesday. Moments ago, President Trump hosted the president of Finland in the Oval Office, taking a victory lap on the deal.
I think it's going to be a day of great celebration. I've never seen anything like it. The streets of so many countries right now, they're just roaring with love and with praise for the people that did this. And these are countries that did this. The whole world came together for this, even Iran.
It follows the president's meeting with his cabinet earlier today, where he celebrated phase one of the deal and what it could mean for the entire region.
As you know, last night we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. So we look forward to welcoming the hostages, like you can't believe, home to their families, and that'll take place early next week. We hope Monday or Tuesday. And all Americans should be proud of the role that our country has played in bringing this terrible conflict to an end.
In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu met with his security cabinet to discuss the details. An Israeli government spokesperson says the ceasefire will go into effect once the wider government convenes and approves the deal. Meanwhile, take a look. These were the scenes in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv today, where people gathered to celebrate the news, waving Israeli flags, singing, dancing, and embracing one another. Similar scenes broke out in the Gaza Strip. People were clapping and cheering in the streets, celebrating what they hope will be the end of hostilities in the war-torn enclave. A spokesperson for Hamas also touting the deal, saying the end of the war has been a central and fundamental goal. But serious questions do remain about the future of the Gaza Strip and the specific implementation of this deal, including what kind of security guarantees are needed to make sure that this fragile deal holds up and that both sides live up to their agreements. And then what does phase one of the deal look like if the countries get there? What it will take to rebuild Gaza, who will govern, and what it will take to fully disarm Hamas. Here's what President Trump said today about what comes next.
But what is phase two? When does it begin?
I'm not going to talk about that because you sort of know what phase two is, but there will be disarming, there will be pullbacks, there will be a lot of things that are happening. You know, I gave you a whole list of 22 different things that will take place. And I think it'll take place, and I think you're going to end up with peace in the Middle East.
What is your view now on a two-state solution for the...
I don't have a view. I'm going to go with what they agree to.
Joining me now is Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel in Jerusalem and NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba from the White House. Richard, I have to go to you first. Israel's government is expected to approve the deal. Can you walk us through what comes next and why this is such a fragile agreement?
So as of this moment, while we're speaking right now, the government has not formally approved the deal. It was supposed to have met several times earlier today. There have been delays after delays, but it seems that progress is still going ahead. There is no real doubt in this country that the deal will be canceled, or there are no doubts that the deal will be stopped. Just a short while ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office put out a statement that Prime Minister Netanyahu was meeting with President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And Israeli media report that the three of them, the two American envoys and the Prime Minister, went in to meet the larger government. So we could be approaching a formal approval from the Israeli government quite soon. But like I said, the fact that the Israelis were going to approve this was never really in doubt. You could see the scenes in Hostage Square today. You can feel a different mood on the streets of Israel, and a palpable change in Gaza as well. People were dancing in the streets of Tel Aviv. Hostage Square, which for 2 years has been synonymous with mourning, with sadness, where meetings have been held in support of the hostages. Today, people were waving Israeli flags, American flags, handing out fresh-baked cookies. I saw several people dressed like President Trump. And in Gaza, also people took to the streets to celebrate the end of this war, the end of Israeli strikes. But as we're speaking right now, the strikes in Gaza have not completely stopped. There was a strike, according to local military officials, just a short while ago, killing at least 4 Palestinians. Israeli troops have not pulled back from populated areas. The ceasefire has not officially begun yet, but the wide expectation is that it's going to be approved tonight. The ceasefire kicking in tomorrow, and the hostages coming in, being released sometime after that, potentially over the weekend, or as President Trump said, early in the week.
So, Richard, you heard one of the correspondents there pressing President Trump on phase 2. So phase 1, the release of the hostages, Israel moving its battle lines back. Talk a little bit about how you anticipate this will unfold and what is the key step that has to happen after that.
So the sequence of events here are being discussed at this moment, and that is why I think we're seeing these 11th hour discussions, 11th hour negotiations, because in addition to the release of the hostages, the pullback of Israeli troops to predetermined lines, Israel also must free hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. That is part of the deal, and Israeli media report that disagreements over some of the names of Palestinian prisoners. So that is part of this process as well. Once, and there's, like I said, there's no anticipation that this is going to fall apart. It's still delicate. Then we would move to phase 2, which is the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, a new government, replacing Hamas, which has been in power for 20 years in Gaza. President Trump's plan talked about replacing Hamas with a government of experts, apolitical technocrats. But so far, we have not seen any list of names. They have not been presented to Palestinians. There's also talk about replacing Hamas as a security force with another security force, potentially an Arab force, an international military, a coalition. But that force has not been assembled. They are not poised to move into the Gaza Strip. So this could take not just weeks, but this could take months.
Yeah, and still so many pieces of this that have to come together, as you have continued to stress throughout all of your reporting. Richard Engel, thank you so much for joining us from Jerusalem. Monica Alba, let me turn to you at the White House. Take us behind the scenes. You've been talking to your sources. Walk us through the final moments of how this peace deal actually came together. It was quite quick in the end.
Yeah, exactly, Kristen. And a lot of this momentum was very clear to White House officials during the UN General Assembly week. I'm told that was really key, and we even heard that echoed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio in terms of that meeting that the president had with those Arab leaders in terms of getting them to sign off on that 20-point peace plan. Their support, I'm told, was essential to this, and they thought that having that locked in, of course, before Prime Minister Netanyahu then came to the White House, also backed the deal. That was critical. And the way that all of the diplomacy played out around Israel's apology in the form of that call from Prime Minister Netanyahu to Qatar over the strike that Israel had launched into Doha. Those moments, I'm told, were really key, and those all did take place in the last 10 days or so. And then you had President Trump, who was feeling very optimistic in the last couple of days. Remember, of course, he had given Hamas that deadline. They responded. And then it was ultimately sending Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to the region to participate in these talks and finalize some of the details. And of course, we all saw just 24 hours ago how that really interesting moment played out with the note from Secretary Rubio to President Trump in order to announce the deal. And I'm told that specifically after all of that happened, the president was the one who wanted to be able to deliver some of this new detail and some of the news to the hostage families themselves, which we saw through a phone call. And that photo that you just put up on the screen is what's happening today and tonight in Israel in terms of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who are meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu again to iron out some of the finer details that still need to be worked out. But this is a White House and a West Wing that is feeling very good about the way this has played out so far, while, of course, a bit trepidatious on what comes next. But overall, the president is extremely proud, he says, of his team, and he is also giving himself a lot of the credit for the art of the peace deal in his mind and the way that he was able to bring the parties to the negotiating table.
Yeah, you're
Kristen.
absolutely right, Monica. There was no shortage of talk and questions about a Nobel Peace Prize. We know he's been talking about that. Let me ask you, because he also discussed visiting the region. What are you going to be watching for there?
It sounds like the president indicated he wants to be in Egypt for an official signing ceremony of this peace plan, but we don't know exactly when that would happen. He says they're working out the final details, and we know he has been invited to also address Israel's parliament, the Knesset, and he said he would accept that invitation, so likely a trip to Israel as well. Again, they're working on all of that, and it is coming down hour by hour, Kristen, to see if it can all materialize.
Monica Alba, thank you for that great reporting from the White House. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is former Israeli Ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren. Ambassador Oren, thank you so much for joining me. We really appreciate it. Dive right into this because this is a hugely significant development. How are you viewing this? Obviously, this is phase one, but how big of a development is this?
First of all, Kristen, great to be with you. It's a very special day, a very emotional day for all of us in Israel. This is an extraordinary accomplishment. Just as a work of diplomacy, it's extremely elegant. And if you would have asked me if it was possible 2 weeks ago, I probably would have said, no way. To get all of these disparate countries that don't agree with one another, it's the Turks and the Qataris, don't necessarily get along with the Saudis and the Emiratis, and much less with the state of Israel, to get them all on the same page around 20 very complex points that address not only the situation in Gaza, but the entire situation in the Middle East, with Israel, the West Bank, the entire region is quite extraordinary, even in historic terms. And it's really a product of the president's willingness to use power in the Middle East, strong power, which gave him tremendous leverage by using military power against Yemen, the Houthis, and then against Iran. That gets you respect in the Middle East, and also the personal relationships that have been developed by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. We're able to really harness those relationships. And of course, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has visited the Oval Office now multiple times. Quite extraordinary. But having said all that, this is maybe the end of the beginning of the end of the war, and certainly with the return of the hostages, which will be just overwhelming for the people of Israel, and the end of fighting in Gaza, which will be overwhelming for the Palestinians in Gaza. But still, the big linchpin, and I think that Richard Engel was right when he mentioned this earlier in his reporting, the linchpin here is the disarmament of Hamas, because all the subsequent steps, including the formation of an international force that's going to come in and reconstruct Gaza, they won't do that. No country's going to send forces to the Gaza if Hamas still has guns, and if it's still a war zone. So that is going to be really the next crucial step. To accomplish that without military pressure, there has to be political pressure brought on those countries, those regimes that are close to Hamas, particularly in Turkey and in Qatar.
And to the skeptics who, to that very point, Ambassador Oren, say they are concerned Hamas may never fully lay down its weapons, may never fully disarm. What say you, and is there enough teeth in this deal to make sure that they do?
That's an excellent question, and I think that it's true. It goes to the DNA of Hamas. Hamas is a jihadist organization. Hamas without guns is really not Hamas anymore. It's like saying Al-Qaeda or ISIS without guns is ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so it's going to take a tremendous amount of diplomacy again, and pressure. And pressure by those Middle Eastern governments that do have influence over Hamas to get them to relinquish those weapons. According to the 20 points, those Hamas leaders who do not want to accept peace with Israel, to live peacefully in Gaza, can leave the Gaza Strip. It's fine. We're happy to see them go, and we don't care where they go. But that is going to be the true test of these 20 points.
You know, it's interesting. In a statement, the IDF chief of staff instructed all forces to, quote, prepare strong defenses and be ready for any scenario. Big picture, not just as it relates to Hamas, but overall, because there are so many different pieces to this. What is your level of confidence that the ceasefire will hold?
I think it will hold in the main. I think Israel will observe the ceasefire. You have to understand that we have a great number of troops in the Gaza Strip, and they're very exposed, and they have been attacked in the last 24 hours. They're going to defend themselves. But having said that, Israel has ceased all offensive operations in Gaza, and I think they'll accord with the withdrawal agreements between Israel and the United States. I haven't seen that map, but there are going to be significant withdrawals. Not entirely. There will be Israeli forces that will remain in significant different strategic locations within Gaza. But keep in mind, this has been a conflict not just between Israel and Hamas. It's between Israel and Iran and Iran's proxies throughout the region. The Houthi rebels continue to fire at Israel. Hezbollah remains a force in Lebanon, much degraded, but still a force there. Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq that have repeatedly fired at American bases there. And Iran is rebuilding its capabilities, and we have to keep a very strong, vigilant eye on Iran, lest Iran once again causes instability and destruction throughout the entire Middle East.
Let me ask you finally, Ambassador, today Prime Minister Netanyahu posted on X an AI-generated image of the president with a caption, quote, "He deserves it," referencing the Nobel Peace Prize. There's the image right there. What is your view on this? Do you think, do officials in Israel think that he does in fact deserve the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, the hostage families have recommended that he receive a Nobel Peace Prize. And certainly Netanyahu has. I have to speak as a citizen. I'm not an ambassador anymore. I don't represent the government. But far be it for me to correct the President of the United States, but he's gone on to say that he solved 7 or 8 different crises in the last 7 months of his presidency. I think he's forgetting that in 2020, he signed the Abraham Accords, which was the first Arab-Israeli peace agreement in over a quarter of a century. And just for that alone, he deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. So if you're asking me as a citizen of the State of Israel, he definitely deserves one.
All right. Ambassador Oren, thank you so very much for joining me for your perspective. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is Ruby Chen, the father of Israeli-American hostage Itay Chen. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Chen. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as we have discussed in the past, I first just want to say how sorry I am for all that your family has been through, your beloved Itay. Let's start with your reaction to this deal that has been brokered by the Trump administration, but as we've been discussing, is quite fragile.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag of emotions. Excitement that after 2 years we see the end of this, as we saw the people at the Hostage Square today, overjoyed, anticipation that indeed it does get into it gets to the finish line, but also anxiety because my family, my son Itay is one of those that are not accounted for. As a U.S. citizen, even though the U.S. have asked multiple times for Hamas to acknowledge that they have my son in their possession and be what his physical status is, and each time Hamas have not provided an answer. So we are hoping for some sort of miracle, but we understand that there's also the other option in front of us as well. But it's time. It's time after 2 years to put an end to this.
It absolutely is. And our hearts break that it's been 2 years. Can you tell us, Mr. Chen, what have these past 2 years been like for you?
It feels like we've been beamed up to a alternative universe where time, moves differently. It feels like it's just a continuous state for us, that we wake up in the morning and fight for the return of Itay that was doing what it was supposed to do. My family, a Holocaust survivor as well as my wife's. And at the age of 18, Itay could have gone to college, but he decided to join the IDF and do his time to protect the Jewish state. And he was protecting the ceasefire that was on the Gaza border. And he and his teammates, they were ambushed by Hamas. And, somehow this humanitarian crisis that has happened to the hostages got coupled with this bigger Palestinian issue that's been going on for decades. And I say that we are collateral damage of simple people that got stuck in the middle of this, and somehow we need to end this for getting the hostages out, which we are glad that the president was able to front load that piece in the agreement, but also those people in Gaza that have been used as human shields by this terrorist organization for such a long time. And there should not be a competition on pain. There's been enough pain and suffering, and I'm glad the president, with his envoys, Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, have been able to put this coalition in place and bring the parties, Hamas and Israel, to a place that they agree in context and in concept to how it's going to look like, and then they go into the details. For now, phase one, get the hostages out, then go into the details of what it exactly means to get to the finish line.
Let me just ask you, Mr. Chen, big picture. There are a lot of questions about what is going to come next. How much confidence do you have that this peace agreement will hold for the long term?
So I would divide my answer to two parts. The first part is, as a father that is a U.S. citizen that wants to see his son out. I'm very focused, speaking to Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner, to keep the eye on the ball and make sure that that piece, the first piece of the hostage deal and the release of all of them, happens. The second part is looking at a better good for the people. And if they don't have an alternative, they'll just go back into fighting. And those, people that are on the Hamas side, the Palestinian side, they need to figure out, what do they want? All the money that they got the last 15 years, they used it not to build schools or build hospitals. They built the war machine to attack the state of Israel. So I think they also need to decide what they want to do going forward. So a lot of moving parts. I'm not a politician. I don't get paid for that. It's above my pay grade. I just want my kid back. And as a U.S. citizen, it's unfortunate that the previous administration was not able to bring him out. This administration has been highly focused on bringing American citizens out of places such as last week, a U.S. citizen out of Afghanistan held by the Taliban was able to come out. This administration cares a lot about U.S. citizens, and I hope that Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, that are here in Jerusalem, are making sure that my son is on the top of the list and will come out as soon as possible.
Well, we so appreciate your sharing your powerful message with all of us. Thank you, Mr. Chen, and please know our thoughts continue to be with your family, particularly over these next several days.
God bless. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much, Mr. Chen. Coming up, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee responds to the breakthrough in the Middle East peace talks as the world waits for the remaining hostages to be released and for the fighting to stop in Gaza. But first, major developments in the escalating legal battle over President Trump's attempts to deploy the National Guard to Portland and Chicago. We have that breaking news straight ahead. Stay with us. It's only on Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We are following breaking news and two crucial court hearings on President Trump's efforts to send troops into states that do not want them there. A federal judge heard from lawyers for the city of Chicago and state of Illinois as they try to block troops who are being deployed into the nation's third largest city. 2,000 miles away, attorneys for Portland, Oregon, as well as the state of Oregon, urged a federal appeals court to leave in place a temporary restraining order that blocked the deployment of troops to that city. President Trump, who threatened to jail Chicago's mayor and Illinois governor for opposing his efforts yesterday, defended his actions today. Look.
We're restoring law and order in our country. We're restoring it here, but we're restoring it right now. We're in Memphis. We're going to Chicago. We're going to other cities. Many governors are asking us to, including Democrats are trying to ask. I don't know what the big problem is. If I were a Democrat governor, I'd be saying, whatever you can do to get crime down, I'll take anybody. You can bring them in I don't care who it is.
NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach joins me now, along with former U.S. Attorney Carol Lamb. Thanks to both of you for being here. Gary, let me start with you and start with Chicago. What types of tea leaves are you getting from the court proceedings
So
today?
The hearing is in a break right now. They're going to be back at 5:30 Eastern. It's at that point that we do expect this judge to issue a temporary restraining order that would block all federalized National Guard members from across the country from being deployed onto the streets of Chicago. But what's happening in this hearing, and we're getting our notes in from our folks and producers in Chicago that are in the hearing itself, is that the Trump administration is using a tactic that they've used time and time again. They sent in a DOJ attorney that doesn't know a whole lot about the case, that does not know all of the details about what the National Guard is going to be doing on the streets, how many exactly are going to be there, and what their use of force objects are when they get on the ground there. So the attorney is saying to the judge, I don't know, or I'm not sure, and that kind of gives him a little bit of space there.
And Gary, safe to assume that if they rule against the Trump administration would appeal.
Very safe to assume that will happen to the Court of Appeals there in that area.
Okay, let's talk about this hearing that is taking place related to what we are seeing in Oregon. You're saying slightly different mood there. What is your sense of what's happening?
So what's happening over there is that the Court of Appeals is hearing an emergency motion on a stay of that lower court's ruling there in Oregon. It does appear, based on the hearing that happened earlier this afternoon, that the appeals court is going to overturn that lower court ruling, meaning the Oregon National Guard can be deployed on the streets of Portland should that order come down within the next few days. There was 2 Trump-appointed judges on that 3-judge panel, and they were really concerned about presidential deference and the amount of power that President Trump does have, that they believe he has, to be able to send out National Guard troops wherever he feels necessary.
Is the difference that these are 2 different judges, courts of appeal, I should say, or is the difference that one has to do with National Guard troops deployed to that state?
So the district court judge made the decision to block the Trump administration from doing this, just like we expect the district court judge should do so in Illinois. It's a matter of when it gets to the appeals court level, when it's a wider group of people and some Trump-appointed judges, some Biden-appointed judges, some Clinton-appointed judges, that's when it gets to a different level of understanding of what's going to happen here.
Okay, Gary, thank you so much. A lot happening in the courts. Carol, let me talk to you. Which of the hearings do you think will have a broader impact in terms of the president's ability to deploy the U.S. military into U.S. cities?
Well, the one that's going to have the broader impact in the short term will be the decision out of with respect to the Oregon National Guard, because that is in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It is already at the appellate court level, whereas the hearing in Chicago was in front of the trial court. So that would get appealed by the losing party to the Seventh Circuit. These are 2 different circuits, 2 different courts, and they can actually come out with contrary opinions, which would then have to be resolved at the Supreme Court level. And I would agree that based on the argument this morning, it does sound like the district court in Oregon is going to, her decision to stay the National Guard coming into Portland is probably going to be overturned, but there could be some conditions on that. It really depends. And it's not always just who appointed the judge, because that district court judge was actually appointed by President Trump as well.
So, Carol, it's safe to say, based on what you're saying, what Gary's saying, that we would expect to see this broader question of whether the president has the authority to deploy the U.S. military, the National Guard, into U.S. cities go to the Supreme Court. What's the timeline for that, Carol? Because all of this is unfolding right now.
Yes, and it could very well be that even if the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decides to allow the National Guard to come into Portland, it could be that the Supreme Court might grant a stay, or the court itself, the appellate court itself, might grant a stay. We simply don't know. There are those procedural issues that would take place. The timeline, again, completely uncertain. It could take days, it could take weeks, it could take months. It simply depends on when the courts decide to come out with their opinions. And it was pretty clear that the judges in the Oregon case today said, we have some more reading and we want to get some more clarity on the facts before we come out with an opinion. So it could take some time. And again, you have a situation here where the courts, as always, have to lag a little bit behind the facts of what's going on the ground, because that's what courts do. Courts, have to give some time to developing the record, developing the evidence, and that just takes time.
And Carol, we're also tracking that the administration is, according to multiple sources, giving serious thought to invoking the Insurrection Act. Legally speaking, does the president have the authority to do that? And could that in and of itself spark more legal battles?
Of course. And the Insurrection Act is sort of the nuclear weapon, if you will, that it has been used in the past, but always with the consent and the request of the governor of the state where the military has been deployed. And, this is really a federal versus state issue. The power of the state to say we can take care of our own problems. We don't need the federal government to come in and do this. And to date, the Trump administration has not used the Insurrection Act, which would allow them to literally send the military in to states to enforce the law, to do law enforcement operations, not simply as is with the National Guard, just to protect federal law enforcement, to enable them to do their jobs. This would actually permit the military to conduct law enforcement operations. So it is a step up, a big step up, and there would be a lot of legal challenges to that.
Yeah, it would be a dramatic escalation. There's no doubt about that. Gary and Carol, thank you both so much. Really appreciate it. Coming up next, 9 days of the government shutdown. The Senate votes again, failing to pass a government funding package again as Republicans face new rifts within their conference. And Democrats express new confidence in their strategy. We're tracking the fallout. Keep it here. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. For a 7th time, the Senate has failed to pass 2 stopgap funding bills to reopen the government. It means the government will remain shut down with no real hopes of an end to the impasse. Senate Republicans seizing on comments Minority Leader Chuck Schumer made about Democrats' solidarity. Schumer telling Punchbowl News, quote, "Every day gets better for us. It's because we've thought about this long in advance, and we know that health care would be the focal point on September 30th, and we prepared for it." Their whole theory was threaten us, bamboozle us, and we would submit in a day or 2. Schumer tried to clarify those remarks by saying every day that Republicans refuse to negotiate to end this shutdown, the worse it gets for Americans and the clearer it becomes who is fighting for them each day. But here was Senate Majority Leader John Thune this morning.
Mr. President, this isn't a political game. Democrats might feel that way, but I don't know of anybody else that does. Mr. President, the longer this goes on, the more the American people realize the Democrats own this shutdown.
Military families will feel additional pain from this shutdown next week when service members do not get their next paychecks. House Speaker Mike Johnson hearing an emotional plea from a woman who identified herself as a service member's wife on C-SPAN this morning.
I'm begging you to pass this legislation. My kids could die. We don't have the credit because of the medical bills that I have to pay regularly. You could stop this, and you could be the one that could say military is getting paid. And I think that it is awful, and the audacity of someone who makes 6 figures a year to do this to military families is insane.
All right, Samantha.
Samantha, I'm so sorry to hear about your situation. The reason I've been so angry this week, and they've been calling me out on media, Johnson's angry. I am angry because of situations just like yours. This is what keeps me up at night. I want you to hear something very clearly. The Republicans are the ones delivering for you. We had a vote to pay the troops.
President Trump, meanwhile, is threatening to put more pressure on Democrats, threatening to permanently cut what he calls Democrat programs.
The shutdown has been, pretty damaging. I mean, it's not yet because it's early, but it gets a little bit worse as it goes along. And we'll be making cuts that will be permanent. And we're only going to cut Democrat programs. I hate to tell you. I guess that makes sense. But we're only cutting Democrat programs. We'll be cutting some very popular Democrat programs that aren't popular with Republicans, frankly, because that's the way it works. They wanted to do this, so we'll give them a little taste of their own medicine.
All right, we'll continue to track it, and we will be right back with much more. We have breaking news to tell you about out of Virginia, where a federal grand jury has indicted New York Attorney General Letitia James. 3 sources familiar with the matter confirmed to NBC News. James was charged with 1 count of bank fraud after President Trump publicly called for his Justice Department appointees to bring charges against her. As NBC News reported in August, Attorney General Pam Bondi appointed a special attorney to probe mortgage fraud allegations against the New York Attorney General, who brought a successful civil fraud case against President Donald Trump before he retook the presidency. NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins me now with more. Also back with us is NBC News legal analyst Carol Lamb. Kelly O'Donnell, let me start with you. Talk about the significance of this and what more do we know? Well, of course, this is set against the backdrop of the president having identified Letitia James, a Democratic statewide attorney general for New York, as one of his perceived political enemies. She, of course, in her political career, brought charges against the president and also talked openly in her campaign about wanting to challenge President Trump from a legal point of view. The president's allies have considered that weaponization of the system. And today there is another way of looking at that, as certainly those who are concerned about how this president is involved with the Department of Justice could ask questions about this. It stems from the Federal Housing Authority's work looking at mortgage records, and her records were identified as being potential evidence in this case. We don't yet know if this was the specific evidence brought forward before a grand jury, but just like in the Comey case, we're talking about the Eastern District of Virginia. We're talking about Lindsay Halligan, who is the acting U.S. attorney for that office, and most recently had been a top White House aide as the deputy staff secretary, a job that brings all the paperwork to the desk of the president from a legal perspective. And she had privately been a lawyer for President Trump in his defense for different events in the past. She is now in this official role, and it's our understanding that she brought the evidence and that one count of bank fraud has been returned by a grand jury. Just like in the Comey case, the former FBI director, this is the first point of what would be a potential prosecution as this goes forward. Will there be challenges to this for what we saw in the Comey case, which is a claim of vindictive prosecution? Are there other circumstances here? And is the question again raised about whether those in the office believed this case had merit? Certainly, we've heard Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, when she was testifying before the Senate, she said in referring to Comey that the grand jury involved, again, Eastern District of Virginia, she described it as one of the most liberal in the United States. That was her characterization. So that's how they defend the process, that evidence is put before a grand jury. We know there is not an opportunity for defense to counter that evidence, but those grand jurors returned one count. So early stages, we've reached out to the Attorney General of New York's office and her counsel, and we await hearing a response from them. But this is a significant event in the context of the president has identified people he wants the Department of Justice to go after, and now we are seeing in a separate mechanism that is happening. Is it connected? Certainly Pam Bondi would not discuss any conversation she had had related to the president putting pressure on her publicly. And we know that after they fired Eric Siebert, who had been the acting attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, then Lindsay Halligan was placed in that role. Her appointment itself is controversial because of the mechanism in which it was done. So you have an attorney general in a state who has brought charges against President Trump in the past, and now we have the Department of Justice under President Trump bringing a single charge against Letitia James. Kristen? Kelly O'Donnell, thank you for that really in-depth look at this breaking news that we are tracking. Carolyn, let me head over to you because Kelly laid out the backdrop to this very well. The fact that you have an indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, the fact now that we have this indictment of Letitia James, the fact that President Trump has publicly called for the Justice Department to take action against both of them. What do you make of this development, and what are the implications for the other people on the list of people publicly named by President Trump who he wants to see indicted?
Well, I think it's pretty clear what people who are on President Trump's list can expect, especially when you have somebody like Lindsay Halligan, whose boss is Pam Bondi, sort of steering the ship at this point. I would just like to shed a little light on what goes on in the grand jury proceeding, because I think there are a few things that we should keep our eye on. Of course, the indictment has not been released publicly yet, so we don't know exactly what it says. But grand jury proceedings, there are 23 grand jurors. They meet in a room. Everything that takes place before the grand jury is secret, so there's no public observation of what goes on in the room. There is only the prosecutor in the room, the prosecutor determines what evidence the grand jury will see. There is no defense attorney and there is no judge in the room. The defendant is not in the room. So there is also no requirement that any exculpatory evidence be presented to the grand jury. So, as I said, the prosecutor controls all the evidence that is shown to the grand jury. So when one is looking at an indictment, it would be interesting to see how many grand jurors actually voted for the indictment. In the case of Jim Comey, it was 14 out of 23. And I will tell you that as a prosecutor, if I had even one or two grand jurors expressing concern and not voting for an indictment, I would be very, very concerned, because they are only voting on probable cause. And they are not voting beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't have to be unanimous. So I don't know that I ever had an indictment returned with less than a unanimous grand jury. So these are things to observe, and just to be aware that any potential defenses were not necessarily presented to the grand jurors in either Letitia James' case or Jim Comey's case.
All right, Kelly and Carol, stand by for me if you would. Let me head to the White House and Yamiche Alcindor, who I believe is also joining us. Yamiche, have you gotten any reaction from the administration to these late-breaking developments that Letitia James has now been indicted?
It's a key question, Kristen. We, of course, as soon as we heard this news, our team went and tried to get some information from the White House. Right now, we have not gotten any information. Our understanding is that we might get something from the Department of Justice at some point, but the president is also someone that we're watching closely. He often posts his reactions online, so we're watching his social media feed to see if something else pops up there. But, you know, we can talk about the fact that the president has been very clear that he believes Letitia James and a number of other political enemies of his, that they have broken the law in some way, that they needed to be prosecuted, they needed to be targeted by the Department of Justice. He posted online telling the Attorney General Pam Bondi to go after specific people. Letitia James, from my understanding, was one of the people that he specifically targeted by name. So I can imagine whenever the president does see this, that we expect him to sort of react to the way that he reacted to James Comey, the former FBI director, getting indicted. He praised that indictment, saying that he was corrupt and a dirty cop. We imagine that he's also going to say something similar about Letitia James, saying that she's someone who is corrupt. The president has attacked her many, many times, saying those words, insinuating that she's broken some sort of law. So we're waiting still here. I'm looking down at my phone to see if the White House gets back to us, but that is sort of where things stand right now, Kristen.
Okay, and Kelly O'Donnell, let me go back to you in terms of what we would anticipate from court proceedings. What happens next? What will you be watching?
Well, the process, as Carol knows far better than I do, after the grand jurors have their true bill, which is the product that they produce, a judge must receive that. In the we know after the fact that it was Halligan who presented it to the judge. It was her signature on that document. We will be efforting to get that in this case to try to get a better sense of the step-by-step. What would then happen, of course, is within a couple of weeks, we would expect the judge to set a summons, a request for Letitia James to appear. In the interim piece, we would hope to hear back from her. She is an elected statewide office holder, so she has a government arm and, of course, her own private counsel to respond to this. One count of bank fraud at a federal level would be requiring for her to make an appearance, enter a plea, and then there would be a process for how would this go forward with prosecution. So we're many steps in this kind of process. This is just the very kind of brink of it beginning. And again, in the wider context, it does raise the question of if others who were listed by the president might also be potentially in this same sort of crosshairs, depending on what the facts are with respect to them. This goes back, as far as we understand, to mortgage documentation, and this would have been Ms. James of New York had processed paperwork for a home for a family member, and that there might have been an issue with that in terms of declaring it a primary residence versus a home that you might have a mortgage on but you don't live in or a family member lives in. We'll be waiting to get more of the specific evidentiary details. As Carol pointed out, what happens in the grand jury is entirely secret, so we don't know what information was presented. But the category would be in a financial crime of perhaps misrepresenting facts. That would be the allegation. Certainly, Letitia James, as a lawyer herself and with capable counsel, will argue her side of this, and we have not heard that yet. As I said, we have reached out to her office and to her counsel, and we expect to hear at some point when they're prepared to respond to this. When these things unfold, even the parties may not know all of what has happened and the specific counts because of the process and the secrecy involved. So once an indictment is officially accepted by the court, then counsel and everyone is notified and they'll have a chance to assess this. But this has specific consequences for Letitia James. It has larger consequences for questions about how is the Department of Justice operating, how is the president influencing that process, if at all. Critics say he's influencing it heavily and has been very clear in doing that publicly and openly. He's spoken in many instances about his fury about Letitia James, so have many of his family members and so on. So the link to the case in New York with the numerous felonies where the president was convicted and this moment certainly can't be ignored. Krista?
Absolutely. And of course, we did hear from James Comey in the hours after he was indicted. So we'll be watching very closely to see what, if anything, we hear from New York Attorney General Letitia James, Kelly O'Donnell, Carol Lam, and Yamiche Alcindor at the White House. Thank you all so much for joining us for that breaking news. We really appreciate it. I do want to turn now to our panel who's on set. Tamara Keith, NPR White House correspondent and host of the NPR Politics podcast. Chuck Rocha, host of the Substack show, The Rocha Revolution, and co-host of the Latino Vote podcast. And Mark Bednar, former advisor to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and a principal at Monument Advocacy. Thanks to all of you for being here. We really appreciate it. Tam, I have to start with you. This is significant for a range of reasons. This is the New York Attorney General. This is someone who was on a list of people who President Trump wrote to his Attorney General. Apparently, it was supposed to be a text, but it winding up on X. So everyone saw it. But he basically said, what's taking so long to indict all of these people?
Right. I pulled up the Truth Social post just because. And he says they're all guilty as hell and essentially demands that they be indicted. And now there is a second indictment. There's only one person left on that list. So for President Trump, he is getting what he asked for, at least in this first stage.
Mark, let me turn to you, because obviously the critique from Democrats is he is weaponizing the Justice Department by publicly calling on his Attorney General to indict people, and then here we have them actually indicted. What do you think the reaction will be within the Republican Party? Do you think the Republican Party will be comfortable with this?
Well, first of all, as as all your reporters indicated, there are still a lot of unanswered questions about, in terms of the evidence that was given, anything about exculpatory evidence, et cetera. So the underlying question is, did Letitia James commit a crime? And so, we have to follow those facts, and I don't think we can get to anything else until we figure out more about that.
You know, Chuck, it's interesting because there's a theme here with some of the people who are being targeted, this idea that they're engaged in mortgage fraud. I've had a chance to interview Congressman Adam Schiff about this and have pressed him on the allegations against him. He has not been indicted or charged with any crime, but he's one of the people in the president's crosshairs, of course, being accused of some type of wrongdoing. And he says, look, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm going to cooperate with the process, come what may. But talk about the optics here and then the actual implications.
There's a few things that go here that are nothing but facts, and that is the retribution tour continues. That's A. And then B, it looks pretty clear that Donald Trump is running the Justice Department. Everybody deserves their day in court. If somebody did something wrong, they'll be held accountable. I get all of that. But right now, we're having elections in Virginia and in New Jersey in less than 30 days. And what the American people can see in my work, in my political work, is they're already a little anxious about what they've been seeing from the government with police in our streets, military, other things, price of things going up, tariffs, wars. There's a lot of unease, and this just adds to another thing that makes voters uneasy.
Yeah, Mark, what do you make of that, particularly as we inch closer to Election Day? And then, of course, on the other end of Election Day, the starting bell goes off for the midterms.
Well, the temperature has been raised for a while. I mean, we know that Letitia James even called, in her campaign, she called President Trump an illegitimate president. She promised to actually go after him. So the stakes were raised immediately at that point. And now, talking about Virginia, we have the AG nominee for the state of Virginia who has, had to account for the fact that he actually wants Republicans and their kids dead. And very few national Democrats actually calling him to not drop out of the race. So there's a lot of high temperature in the country right now, and that still doesn't get to the fact that Letitia James, maybe she committed a crime. We'll have to find out. But this is a national thing that we're facing right now.
It is, and that's one of the races that's getting a lot of attention. Tim, it's interesting. A new poll found actually a majority of Americans believe President Trump has used his office to punish his political rivals. Talk about the implications. 66%. What are the implications of that finding? The backdrop of the fact that people are going to be voting soon.
Yeah, so President Trump, when he was running, said that success would be his retribution. However, once in office, retribution has been his retribution. It's not just telling the Justice Department what he wants them to do, but it's any number of other things, including just today saying that he's going to cut programs that Democrats like to punish Democrats. It's And I have to say, that question doesn't ask, do people like this? Because there are a lot of people who voted for President Trump who are absolutely outraged that he was prosecuted, that his home was searched, and say turnabout is fair play. So it's not it's not universally despised, but certainly there are a lot of people who are very concerned about what they see as the weaponization of the government, which is interesting because when Trump was out of office, there were a lot of different people concerned about the weaponization of government.
Chuck, there is this question about, can this cycle, and this is not to say that we're comparing apples to apples, but can the cycle of people feeling as though the Justice Department is being weaponized be broken? How can trust be restored, whether in this administration or the next?
There's a new poll that came out last week in the New York Times. As an old gray-haired Mexican who's done campaigns for a long time, it's normally the economy and jobs that's number one in every campaign every time. But it was this anxiety that I keep talking to. It was right after Charlie Kirk is when this poll went in the field. So there's folks talking about, can't we find a way to get along? But every day there's another example, whether it's on our side with the AG in Virginia that I take ownership of, or other sides of where it just seems like it's something every day. And today it does look like retribution, and it does look like he put in his lawyer to get this done.
All right. Well, we'll have you all back to have a broader conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time today. But thank you all for being here, for rolling with the breaking news. We really appreciate your perspective. We are out of time, but we are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There is a lot more news ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.